Welcome back to another episode of LEO Radio. I'm Joey Sperlazza, joined with Colin Codlington. We're continuing our leadership series today on decentralized command, one of the key principles that Jocko hits on in the book Extreme Ownership. One of the first points we want to bring up from this particular chapter: human beings are generally not capable of managing more than 6 to 10 people, particularly when things go sideways and inevitable contingencies arise. Teams must be broken down into manageable elements with a clearly designated leader. Those leaders must understand the overall mission and the ultimate goal of that mission, the commander's intent.
So here again, we have a pretty simple concept that may not be very easy to execute depending on your agency and how it's set up. But the idea is pretty straightforward. First thing that we see there where they talk about managing small teams, to put it in law enforcement terms that we're pretty familiar with, it's essentially span of control. So for our frontline leaders, 6 to 10 officers is typically what we're going to see for your squad if you're a sergeant. One of the other components of this that I think, again, is woven throughout the book and throughout many of these concepts is that of ego. And I think that one of the difficult things for the more senior leaders to do is cede that power, check their ego, understand that they don't have to be in control of every little thing, every little decision, every little element, and actually cultivate those junior leaders that are subordinate to you and give them some authority, give them an opportunity to lead. And again, that doesn't have to be formal leaders. It doesn't have to be a sergeant necessarily. Sergeants can be doing that with their officers, giving them an opportunity to step up and lead in certain scenarios, or giving them a longer leash, giving them some autonomy, letting them lead, starting with themselves, and then maybe a senior guy on the tour and the squad, whatever the case may be. So, cultivating those leaders by giving them these opportunities. The other thing is the commander's intent, right? So for a lot of us, we're going to see that in our agency's mission statement. So, a lot of people may not see the importance of that. I know in my agency, for example, with close to 1,000 guys, if you were to ask a lot of people about the mission statement, they're probably not even familiar with it. But if you're doing it properly, that's thing that should be akin to the commander's intent. It should give guidance in your absence. People should know what their mission is clearly and what's expected of them, so that when there's not a formal leader in a position above them in the moment, they can carry on with the mission absent of explicit orders.
And you've hit on Simon Sinek in the past and the powerful why, right? Putting
Sure.
the why into that equation and looking at the why when you're giving the commander's intent. You're going to be faced with times where you have to call an audible. There's going to be times in front of you where you can't follow a script, because nothing that we do is scripted. This isn't a play. This isn't a movie. This is real life. So the way that you respond and react, the more that you understand the why, the more able that you'll be able to adapt and overcome whatever challenges that you have in front of you. So part of that commander's intent has to be associated with a very good explanation. And the more that you give that explanation, the more that you give that why, the more that you show and involve the bottom line troops in that understanding of what your planning process was, the easier it'll be for them to go out and achieve that mission. And getting work done through other people is something that has to be something that is thought of as a forethought from commanding officers. And the higher you go in rank, the more you have to think about getting your work done through other people. You can't have your fingers in the weeds of every single element of every single incident that we're facing. And part of that goes back to training, and part of that also makes sure that going back even before that, making sure that you're recruiting the right people. But if you have the right people in place, you have to give them the tools to succeed. And part of that is letting them understand the why, understanding the mission that's in front of you. And manageable elements is something I think that's also worth talking a little bit more about, right? On the surface, you might think that, hey, I could probably handle maybe 15 to 20 people. Maybe it's a planned protest, or maybe it's something that's a larger scale event that's going to need a lot of people. If you sacrifice that frontline supervision because of the fact that it's a planned event, doesn't have a lot of propensity for violence, or even you and I work together with the 4th of July fireworks in Jersey City, right? If we don't have an adequate amount of supervision to break those officers that are in front of us down at the teams, when things go very bad, you could lose that span of control very quickly and very instantaneously. You have to have contingency planning as we're moving into these types of planned events. And of course, day to day, there might be things that happen and people call out sick. We adapt and overcome. There might be days where I have 15 to 20 officers and I'm the only supervisor. We get through it. You're going to muddle through it, but that should never be the intended design. And the more that you have that contingency planning in place and you try to make sure that that ratio is appropriate from the beginning, the less likely it will be to get out of control. Because not a lot of things in police work are a life and death decision, right? But we're always prepared for that life and death decision. We're always prepared for that active shooter situation, for things to go really bad. In this past 4th of July, I was with your guys at the command post, and there was a bunch of juveniles that were shooting Roman candles at the officers that were down on the waterfront at Exchange Place. So making sure that we are responding to that threat appropriately, which it is a threat, but we're responding to it appropriately, making sure that we have junior police officers paired up with adequate senior leaders to make sure that we're handling those jobs correctly, because that might be the first time that they've been in that type of situation. So those ratios have to be planned early, planned often, and really making sure that you're not just looking at what is this event on the surface to what could this event actually become.
Yeah, you hit on a few things there too that I think take us naturally into the next point here, which is junior leaders must be empowered to make decisions on key tasks necessary to accomplish the mission in the most effective and efficient manner possible. And really, I think that you could even stop that whole line much earlier and just go with junior leaders must be empowered to make decisions. Period. The rest of that, yeah, it's important, but we should be doing a lot more of this, and for a number of reasons. What comes to mind immediately is there's a lot of discussion in and around our profession these days about the generational changes, right? So many guys, there's been a mass exodus in the last few years of senior, seasoned, experienced guys. And while many of us are dealing with, frankly, a crisis in recruiting, we are still hiring. And so we're bringing in a new generation of people, and not to overly generalize, but many of these young people that are coming on the job have not had to make many decisions in their life before law enforcement, and in very few cases have they had to make any critical decisions in high stress situations, right? So we have to start teaching them, training them to make decisions. And the best way to do that is empower them and push them. Start with the little things, the easy things, so that when and if they find themselves in that more tricky, challenging situation, they've at least got some experience. We've helped them to build some confidence, and they know that their leaders have their back, when they make a decision. So that's number one. Number two, again, with this concept of empowering leaders, you touched on a couple of points with the span of control and contingency plans. And here again, we shouldn't be waiting until guys are in a formal leadership position to allow them to start making decisions. We trust our officers, regardless of whether they're on 5 minutes or 5 years. We trust them enough to put them out in the street alone in a radio car, or maybe with a partner and a firearm, and go answer for service. We should be able to trust them to make decisions, right? So, empowering them to that, and letting them see that, again, we'll have their back, right? And another great tool with this, and Jocko talks about it in the business sense, and I think you mentioned it earlier, they should be telling us what they're going to do as their senior leaders. The junior leaders should be coming to us and telling us what they're going to do. So allow them to come to you with a plan and let them have ownership of it. If going back to the very beginning here, extreme ownership should be instituted throughout the organization. Your young officers should be taking ownership of everything in their sphere of control, and everybody up the chain should be doing the same. The junior guys, their sphere of control may only be themselves and maybe their partner, but let them control the things that they can control within that sphere, their appearance, how they handle their calls, and so on. When they come to you with a plan, when you give them that opportunity to plan and execute, instead of saying, no, we're going to do it my way, help them to tweak their own plan. Let them take ownership. You're going to get a lot more buy-in and probably a lot more enthusiasm if they're allowed to execute their own plan rather than you hijacking it and saying, no, we're doing it my way.
There's also a
Right.
way that
So,
you could there's also a way that you could cultivate that you get your influence with still them coming to you with what that actual idea is, right? So they present you plan A and you want to get them to plan D because you've done this before and you need to get them there. The series of questions that you ask them and how you respond to their plan, it's a lot different if you say that didn't work for in the past. This is what we did in the past. This is what we're going to do now. Saying, okay, well, we've tried this. This is what's happened in the past. What do you think we could do differently? How
right.
can
Versus
how can
that's stupid. It's not going to work,
yeah, yeah.
which is
It's a lot,
what we get a lot in our profession.
of course, but it's a lot different, and that's participatory leadership, right? Rather than being the autocrat, rather than being overbearing. And also, and I could say it from being the junior leader also, right? When you have people that are taking the time to talk to you, trying to get the best out of you, if it's your idea and you're involved in that planning process, and even if ultimately it was your commanding officer's final plan, the more that you're involved in that process and the more that you're involved in that exchange of information, when you have the luxury to actually sit there and plan something, you're going to want be a lot more vested in it. You're also going to be more invested in the outcome of it and the hot wash of it afterwards and the after action and the planning of it for the future. And the more that, and we've talked a lot about trying to shift culture in our profession. So the more that we're shifting that culture to be able to be bringing people up, I think that that's the right move into the future. And we're hiring people at such a young age now. We're bringing people in that are kind of right out of college. We have a couple people that are working with us that this is their first real job. I mean, they had part-time jobs that they worked through college, but if you have somebody who's now entering a leadership position and this is the only real work experience that they have, it's even more important to take that time to work on them. And the more that you work on them early in their career, by the time they're in that formal leadership position, the more hands-off you can be. I got really spoiled towards the end of last year because people that worked with me that worked throughout the year, they were so well trained. They knew what I wanted that I didn't have to be overbearing on them. I didn't have to be in the weeds with them. And I'm working with a new sergeant this year. We just started our bid change. And part of what I said to him at the beginning is, you're the sergeant. This is really your squad. I'm the lieutenant. I'm overseeing the squad. I'm overseeing the operations of two completely different districts while I'm working. But I want you to take the ownership and I want you to take the time to cultivate this. But by him taking ownership of the officers below him, it's going to make my job easier. It's going to help me delegate that down to him. And that's
Sure.
really what this comes down to, pushing down the work, making him take ownership for the jobs and making him also develop in his role, right? Because we want him to be up and coming and make sure that he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and let him develop his team, and let him build the leadership capital with his guys and girls and so on. And I just want to go
It's
back
hard.
to
It's hard. I don't mean to cut you off, but that's
no,
hard
no.
to do because
Yeah.
I have such a good relation. Most of the people on my squad this year, the same as last year. I have a long-standing rapport with them, and like they still call me for stuff, and I don't want them to ever stop calling me because I love the interaction. I love talking to these guys, but I don't want to do that at the detriment to the sergeant that I'm now working with because this is the first time he's worked this specific shift, which is a busy shift, and like like I have to purposely take that step back, and it's hard to do because I want to be down there sometimes. I like still being in the action. I like still being hands-on with some of the calls, but sometimes it's you just have to take that step back. It's hard. It
Yeah,
is.
it's one of the many challenges as you move up, and there's there's no there's no clear cut path with that. I think I've gotten some of those calls too, and every situation is different. Sometimes the answer is going to have to be, well, have you spoken to the sergeant about this? And occasionally I've had it where the answer to that was yes. And maybe it was a case law or procedural question. And they say, I'm pretty sure that they're wrong. And they don't want to hear it when I try to talk to them about it. Can you give me, can you help me? First, can you answer the question? Second, if I am right, how should I proceed with this? So there's a million and one scenarios that come up, and they can be tricky. But I think as long as you are keeping in mind that you want to allow that subordinate leader to do their job and lead their team, that will keep you going in the right direction. So you had mentioned ownership of plans, and how you're going to get more buy-in and empower your subordinates when you tweak their plan rather than forcing or imposing your plan on them, right? And what I found is one of the great ways to help build that culture of collaboration is going to them with your plans. Here again, check your ego, right? Now. Occasionally, there's going to be times in our profession where there's no time for this. Hey, we got to execute right now. Time is of the essence. Then hopefully at that point you've built enough leadership capital, your people trust you, they have faith in you, you're gonna lay down, this is the plan, and they're gonna execute. But when the situation allows for it, there's nothing wrong with, and in fact I strongly encourage leaders to go to their people and ask them for their input on a plan. Go and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? This is the approach I'm looking at taking. Do you have any ideas? Do you see any pitfalls here, any landmines, whatever the case may be? I had, just as one example, I had something recently that we were getting ready to roll out with some policy changes and some new documents that we were pushing out. And it was something that's primarily going to be dealt with by lieutenants. I went to a who has no experience in what exactly it is that I do with the use of force stuff. He's never worked as a desk lieutenant. And I walked him through what we were doing. I showed him the form that I'd created, said, hey, let me know what you think. Do you have any questions? Because if this guy who doesn't have that experience, but he's a very sharp guy, he's an experienced cop, if he understands it and it's clear to him, then I should have no problems. And he pointed out a couple of things that made, hey, you know what? That's a great catch. Let me make an adjustment there. Just getting another set of eyes on it was really helpful. And
And
now,
when you have stuff that's really long and drawn out and detail oriented, you have so many thoughts going on inside of your brain, and you think that you cover every point. And sometimes that second set of eyes, it's worth its weight in gold, just to be able to get that secondary input, and just to say, oh, you're right, I should have thought about that, right? And that's why there's always value to that teamwork.
100%. And beyond just the mission at hand there, the present task, think about when you do that, what you're building with your team. Wow, the boss actually values my input. That's got a lot of value right there by itself. And then they're going to give you that same respect when you go to give them some input on their plan. Hey, he asks me for my input. The least I can do is listen to his. But I think that those small opportunities, if we look for them and take advantage of those opportunities, we'll see the rewards return to us in a big way. So,
All right, I think that leads us right into the next part. And you kind of touched on about dealing with emergent situations, that, that's not the time to be planning and having a kumbaya session. And there's also times that you have to deal with people that are blatantly insubordinate or blatantly incapable of handling the task at hand. And, discipline, and that's separate. We're obviously moving through this book methodically and talking about the points that he is bringing up. And one of the things that he gets into, and he talks about it right here: decentralized command does not mean junior leaders or team members operate on their own program. That results in chaos. Instead, junior leaders must fully understand what is within their decision-making authority, the left and right lateral limits of their responsibility. And that's key too, right? And like I said, I just started working with a new sergeant. I laid out to him on a piece of paper, bulleted points, exactly what my expectations are and exactly where I'm empowering him from the beginning. If he moves through everything the way I know he's going to, and I've worked with him in other capacities and he's very capable, but I set out very clearly what my expectations are, and here is where you operate. The second that things go outside of this, outside of those norms, I need to be brought in and I need to be consulted about certain types of instances because I'm ultimately the one that has to answer for the happenings on our squad, right? And I'm not going to be foolish and remove myself. I don't want to be the laissez-faire leader. I don't want to be viewed as like just trying to get responsibility off my plate because it's not that at all. But you have to understand what those limits are, and you have to also push out the clear expectation of what limits that they're going to operate within. And the more that they develop, the more that they mature, the more that they learn, the bigger those limits get, right? So as long as we're operating with those in those limits, the it's endless. The possibilities are endless to get it as big as possible, but you have to set those predefined limits early and make sure that those expectations are clear because having any type of ambiguity, it's going to lead to potential problems.
One thing I'd like to touch on real quick, just because maybe not everybody in our audience is familiar with this language. This term left and right lateral limits. If you haven't heard that or dealt with that before, it's something that does come from the military. And typically what it's dealing with is when you're on a range and as a machine gunner, I saw this a lot. You got the stakes out or whatever. You basically what it is you will not fire outside of these limits to your left and right, right? So we apply that in our profession or in business, whatever the case may be. Hey, yeah, I think most of us have heard the term "stay in your lane," right? Stay in your lane. So
I've heard that
what
too much.
what are the yeah, yeah. So, where's the where's the double yellow? Where's the shoulders? Where's the hard barrier? What are my limits so I can ensure that I'm not firing outside of where I'm supposed to be, or I'm not drifting out of my lane here. And so I think that this is important at all levels from the bottom up. But this one, I will say, I think is particularly important for guys in our position, that middle management position, right? Because as a sergeant, I think most of our leaders are getting, they're very new to having authority, and they're slow to spread their wings there. And at the upper levels, they're very comfortable and experienced. Oftentimes with captains, deputy chiefs, they know they probably only have one guy that they're reporting to, and that's the chief. So that this isn't really as much of an issue for them. For those of us in that middle management position, this becomes really important as you're taking on more rank, more responsibility, more authority. How far are you really allowed to go? What decisions are you allowed to make? What do you have to run up the chain, and so on? And I think very few of our senior leaders are likely to make this explicit for us. So we have to take it upon ourselves many times to directly ask the question, boss, what are my left and right lateral limits here? What exactly am I allowed to do in this role or with this particular assignment, whatever the case may be? They might put you in command of an event, for example. What things do I have to bring up the chain, and what do I actually have authority over?
Yeah, and it's important, and you just said it. And I know we've talked about it in the previous episodes, but it's important that when you're not given specific direction, seek specific direction. If you
Yeah.
recognize that there's something that is unclear to you, and even if it's something that you realize later as you're moving towards through the planning process, it's worth understanding and defining what that boundary would be, or understanding what you can and can't do. We operate in a world of budgets, and especially now in our agency, and it seems like it's spreading throughout, at the very least, the state of New Jersey, if not countrywide. There's a lot more budgetary concerns, and budgets are, I don't want to say easy, but budgets are a little bit more understandable because it comes defined with a dollar amount. we're spending money. We know what our cap is. If you have to go beyond that cap, if it looks like you're going to go beyond that cap, you would have to um, alter your planning, right? You would have to ask for more money. Easy, but it's a lot different when you're looking at theoretical capital, not actual capital. So making sure that we understand that. All right. So moving on to the next point. To be effectively empowered to make decisions, it is imperative that frontline leaders execute with confidence. They must have implicit trust that their senior leaders will back their decisions. Without this trust, junior leaders cannot confidently execute, which means they cannot exercise effective decentralized command. I mean, we've been touching on that pretty
Yeah,
extensively, but
this is such a major issue presently with everything going on in our profession across the country. We're seeing some senior level police leaders and political leaders too, because that comes into play as well, who are great at this, and some who are really, really terrible at it. I was reading an article today about some officers that were recently acquitted in a case out in, I want to say it was Tacoma, out west. And forgive me if that's wrong. We might have to edit that, but their chief came out after these officers were acquitted and blasted them, said that they should resign, and the all kinds of terrible things he said, not only about those officers but about the profession and so on and so forth. I mean, what kind of message is that sending down the chain within that agency? Certainly nobody's going to be confident that their leadership will have their back if they make a decision and it goes sideways. That being said, one of the things I think that is often missed by a lot of our senior leaders, and this is especially true with the use of force stuff. And there's a couple of guys out there that are doing amazing things all around the country in the use of force realm. That's just so important these days. Jamie Borden and Danny King out in Vegas, couple of phenomenal guys, some of the best in the country when it comes to that stuff. And they talk about an interesting concept. Basically, when somebody makes a decision, whether they are a hero or demonized, is based entirely many times on the outcome, not why they made the decision, the process they went through, whether or not the decision based on the information they had in the moment was. There's so many things that go into that, and oftentimes they're judged entirely on the outcome, even if there were intervening events that changed the outcome that were out of their control. We will look at the decision and evaluate the decision based solely on the outcome. It's really doing a pretty severe disservice in many cases, and an injustice in many others to those officers. So as their leaders, I think it's incumbent upon us to do a better job at evaluating the decision-making process and the decisions themselves that are made by our subordinates, and having honest conversations with them about that, so that they can make better decisions next time, regardless of how good or bad the decision was. Critique things, debrief it, so on, but look at the decision-making process and the decision, not just the outcome, right? It's super important. And again, as they said here, that it's not complicated. They're not going to be able to exercise this decentralized command if they do not believe that you have their back. It's a bottom.
yeah, and I love that use of force analogy, and ties right into Graham versus Connor, right? It's objectively reasonable without the benefit of hindsight, because hindsight's always 2020, and it's and going back to again to what we've talked about, if the culture is that you're Monday morning quarterbacking to criticize and make it look like you would have done the job better, and there's certain announcers on ESPN that I don't particularly like because that's all they act, and these people have never stepped foot on a football field. So to be criticizing to just say I could have done it better, that's nobody wins there. If you're looking at the exactly what you said, if you're looking at the thought process, I love that, especially when it comes to decision making. And a lot of the things that we do don't result in life or death decisions. So to treat everything like it was a life or death decision would be foolish on all of our parts. And how that message is delivered, and when it's delivered in the way of coaching, right? To use the football analogy, every professional team, every college team, even high school team, they all watch film. Why are they watching film? To pick apart their mistakes so that they see what they did poorly, what they did well, and how they could build on what they did well and how they coach up. And that's a very powerful tool. And for us to not look at that as being a positive interaction. And with use of force, there are sustained use of force complaints that result in retraining, right? Not everybody that uses force inappropriately is going to be fired because it wasn't necessarily excessive, but it could have been done better. And how you do that is via coaching. I'm not saying to ignore mistakes. That would be foolish on everybody's fault. But having the back on your decisions that were made, it's not necessarily having the back and just saying that what he did was correct or what he did was perfect. It's saying what he did was make a decision, which a lot of leaders are afraid to do sometimes, right? So it's good that he made a decision, and we're admitting that we could have done this a little bit better. Part of doing that better is having that conversation and having that coaching moment. And we're not ignoring things that could have been done better. It's the approach that you take, how you coach them up, and how you move them through that thought process, so that we do get better in the future.
One other thing with this too, and this applies certainly to the use of force stuff, because I think so many people don't know what they don't know when it comes to that. But there's this next point that I want to make. Really, I'm speaking directly to our mid-level and especially our senior level leaders. Here again, and this will come up, I think, in every discussion we have about leadership. Check the ego. Recognize that just because you have stars or bars on your collar does not mean that you know everything about everything. Certainly, hopefully, you've got a lot of training and experience under your belt, and that's great. But if you think that you are the smartest guy in the room at every meeting, you're surrounding yourself with the wrong people. You should have people around you that you can trust and that you can look to for input, and you should be recognizing that you do not know everything about everything. And I like that you brought up the concept of reviewing game film, right? So, I talk about that a lot in the use of force class. People say, I know everything I need to know about that incident. I saw the video, right? I saw the 30-second clip that they played on YouTube or on CNN. The video doesn't lie. Well, do you really know everything you need to know? And I'll say, if I were to sit down with whoever your favorite player is, Peyton or Eli Manning or whoever, right? Hey, I played football in high school. I understand the game to a degree. If I sit down and watch films with one of those guys, am I going to see the same thing they see? Am I going to pick up on all the nuances that they are? I would compare what they're seeing versus what I'm seeing to something like Neo in the Matrix, right? Like they're seeing infinitely more, and they're looking at the same film. And why is that? Because they're experts. They are experts in that subject area, right? Now, we could talk about use of force, but this applies to all manner of things in our profession, incident command, traffic stuff, whatever. You sit down, you have me sit down with somebody and look at use of force, right? And I say this humbly because guys like the ones I mentioned before, Jamie Borden, Danny King, the guys from Force Science, Von Klein, there's a bunch of these guys that would put me to shame. We could sit down with somebody and look at a use of force incident, and they are not seeing a fraction of what I or some of these other guys are seeing. I say all of this to get to the real point, which is, again, when we talk about effectively empowering our people and letting them know that we're going to have their back, we cannot be quick to judgment. We cannot judge our people and their decisions based solely on the outcome. We should be sitting down, doing a real debrief when things go wrong, with people who are experts in the area that we're evaluating, and taking a good hard look at what went right, what went wrong, how it went wrong, why it went wrong, before we pass judgment, and give our people the benefit of the doubt. And then have that conversation with them. You know, ask, why did you make certain decisions at certain stages of this incident? Get a full comprehensive understanding, and communicate with them, train them. Right. A lot of times people are making decisions that are reasonable that end badly, because that's the nature of our business. So I don't want to beat it to death, but it's something I feel really strongly about. So
Yeah, no, it's important, and especially with the climate of the world, making sure that officers are using the appropriate amount of force, and rightfully so, they should be held accountable for it. So it's a hot topic that's never going to go anywhere, and rightfully so, because nobody wants to see people get unnecessarily hurt, right? Um, so lead us to our next point. Senior leaders must constantly communicate and push information, situational awareness to their subordinate leaders. Likewise, junior leaders must push situational awareness up the chain to their senior leaders to keep them informed, particularly of crucial information that affects strategic decision making. And that has to be an important piece of decentralized command, because they can't make informed decisions. They can't adjust plans without getting feedback from the street. And I was in a different part of the country teaching our Command One class, and there was a newly promoted lieutenant who'd been a sergeant for, I think it was said he was a sergeant for about 10 years. And when I was talking to him, he was talking about how little his feedback as to what was actually happening in the street was given by the actual command staff. The command staff wasn't really soliciting that information. They weren't actually listening to valuable feedback that he was giving. And in the course of the last decade, and especially in the last 5 years since George Floyd and the pandemic, and with everybody now having body cameras, there's been a lot of changes in what has happened in law enforcement. And part of it, everything that we've said, is that we now have the ability to review even routine calls for service. It's actually something that's required by policy in our department. I have to review body cameras for the officers that work with us. If we're doing that with this in the sense of only to try to criticize people, it's not going to be well received. So now this sergeant or newly promoted lieutenant was telling me that they started criticizing people so heavily that guys were getting more and more cautious as they were handling calls, and they weren't handling calls because of the fear of being criticized. And that's valuable feedback to be passing up the chain of command. He was getting information from the front line and trying to get that information up. But if the people at the top aren't listening to the frontline supervisors as to what's really happening within their agency and at the level of the ground troops, you're missing an opportunity. You're missing an opportunity for growth, and you're missing an opportunity to make your to move your agency into the future.
yeah, and I think one of the really key aspects of this particular bullet point is that communication has to go both ways. And so many of the things that we've spoken about up until this point, again, every concept in here is interwoven, right? And should they all are connected. So all the concept that we've talked about up until now can help to build or detract from effective communication up and down the chain. That up and down communication is really critical, and especially to this point. Just as an example, we were having an issue with our OC spray. We know that it's one of the better tools that we have, that people are usually not injured if you don't include the temporary intended effects of the OC spray. Very few injuries result when we properly use OC spray. It's a great tool. A lot of our guys wouldn't use it. We get to find out that it's because of the cross contamination, right? Also, a lot of times the particular one that we had, if it wasn't perfectly up and down when it was deployed, in other words, held vertically upright, it wouldn't work. Well, that's not something that the chief is ever going to know, because when's the last time the chief had to go out and pepper spray somebody, right?
Hopefully,
Not
yeah.
likely that a deputy chief or even a captain is going to be aware of that.
That would mean
So,
that the CompStat meeting went really bad.
right. Yeah. So having those open channels of communication, and then looking at some use of force incidents, and people picking up on that and communicating that up the chain, and having that relationship where the command staff has trust in the lower level leaders who are subject matter experts, in this case in use of force and the tools and equipment related to use of force. And those guys say, hey, there's a new product out that's the same cost that would solve all these problems. It's a gel-based OC spray. It'll the way that the can is designed, it'll work no matter how you're holding it, even if it's upside down. You don't get the cross contamination, so on and so forth. All right, great. We communicate that up the chain, and now we're getting a replacement and problem solved. Likewise, pushing things down the chain. One of the biggest gripes for so many of our guys in this day and age, with all these new policies coming out and all the constant changes, guys at the bottom level don't understand why they're being asked to do certain things, because that is not communicated down the chain. It's simply do this, or here's a policy change. That's how you're doing it from now on, with no explanation of, again, the Simon Sinek concept, right? The why. Maybe start with, as he suggests, because of this issue or this incident or whatever the case may be, we've got to make a course correction here, and this is what we're going to do going forward, right? Make it make sense. Get that buy-in. Here again, this goes back to a number of things we've already discussed from this book. So that effective communication up and down the chain is really critical.
Yep. And a lot of the relationships that are brewed at the frontline level between a frontline sergeant and maybe a lieutenant, depending on the agency, and the officers should be that of trust. And the more that there's trust, the more that they're going to be actually able to get honest feedback from the frontline troops. And the more that there's trust between the sergeant and the lieutenant and the captain, and so on, the more you'll actually get a better free flow of information. I've been very fortunate in my time as lieutenant. I've worked with a couple of really good captains. We actually just had a change of leadership to somebody who I am looking forward to spending a lot of time with. But the more that you're able to have that personal relationship, the more you can give them that honest feedback, because no one will think that they're going to be judged for it. They don't think that there's going to be repercussions. And I'm not saying that we're going to completely change the world because you brought a problem to us, but the more you're able to get that free flow of information, it kind of quells the grapevine, which is a huge problem in my police department. I'm sure your police department and every other large police department. But the more that you're able to get that free flow of information, the better it's going to be. And the more that it sounds like and seems like they value your input and opinion, the more people are going to be vested into the mission, and the better the work that the people are going to do, right? And I think at
Yeah.
least no, go ahead.
I was going to say, you talked about the grapevine. One of the worst things in terms of communication that you can do as a leader is have that vacuum, because people are gonna fill it up, and in the context of that conversation, they're gonna fill it with bullshit, for lack of a better term. That's really what you can expect. If you're not pushing out accurate information, there's a vacuum of information there. People are going to insert their own ideas, the rumors, the gossip. They're gonna make stuff up in some cases. So you need to make sure that you're pushing out as much information as you can in a timely and effective way. And when I say an effective way, by the way, that's really important too, right? There's communication and there's effective communication. Sending out an email is not necessarily effective communication. That's depending on the subject matter. That may not be the best way to convey your message. You might have to leave headquarters and go to a roll call and talk to the guys. You may want to have a conversation with the union delegate or president or whatever, and convey the message directly yourself through a conversation that an email might not really achieve, and let him help you spread the word. Um, there's we rely too much on the Power DMS and stuff like that to do the communicating for us, and in many cases, that is not going to be effective communication.
Sure. And I know your agency is very on top of training, so is mine. How many of the smaller agencies that rely on Power DMS, how long did it take from the time that they implemented the new use of force policy for officers in some of the smaller agencies across New Jersey to be able to actually get real hands-on training in a formal instruction environment, taught by an instructor that's so well versed in the new policy that they're able to answer questions off the cuff? How long did that really take to get implemented, right? Because those were substantial changes, especially um, considering when was the last time that it was changed prior to 2022? What was the previous
Significant
version?
changes, it had been decades.
Oh,
I,
right?
I would
But we were
I
doing the
would
same thing all of our
suggest,
careers. So, like,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but that's
and I
that's
would
like,
suggest that at this point, based on some of the conversations I've had with guys from other agencies at training and whatnot, since that was rolled out in, what was it, January of 22,
yes.
and there was an update in April of 22. Since that was rolled out, I believe there's still quite a few agencies who have not had the kind of training that you're talking about. I think there are many agencies out there in New Jersey where the entirety of their so-called training with the new use of force policy is reading it on Power DMS.
And it's not to go off on a tangent. It just hits home to what you're saying. There's times that email is an effective way of communication. It's very fast, it's very cost effective. It's very not burdensome for the most part, but when there's this time and place for that, there's a time and place for Power DMS. If you're updating our uniform policy, put it up on Power DMS. I don't need to go to a class for that.
One
But
of the things that we're doing, by the way, actually with Power DMS, because now the role that I'm in presently, I'm starting to look at that as a tool and try to see how we can better use it. Because from what I've been told, it does a lot more than what we're using. One of the things that we're doing is saying, to the point I made before, sometimes a conversation is better, right? Better one-way conversation than no conversation at all. So we're making some videos. We're putting out roll call videos. We're doing stuff where, hey, as we roll out a new policy, we're going to post the policy on Power DMS, but there's also going to be a video where we explain things in plain English. So you're not left to just read the policy on your own. We're pointing out, hey, take note of this. Let me explain this to you. Hey, this is what we're looking for with regards to this issue, so on and so forth. So you actually get somebody talking to you rather than just checking the box that you read it and you really didn't, or whatever the case may be.
yeah, no, that's good. All right, so that goes right into the next point, right? Leaders who are so far removed from the troops operating on the front line become ineffective, and that just goes directly into everything we just spoke about.
I have a note there too, by the way, as a great example of this. For those I've seen Band of Brothers, and if you haven't, what a tremendous series that's really a study on leadership. I mean, you could do a whole semester course on that series as a study of leadership. But there's a particular episode where they're in Bastogne, and this so-called leader, Lieutenant Dyke, is a prime example of exactly what we're talking about here with the battlefield aloofness and the leader who is absent, right? So big thing with this that I think we see as people move up is never coming out of the office, never coming out of headquarters. If you have not been on the road pushing a radio car in 10 years, you might be out of touch. You might want to, do a tour, get out there a little bit. But even aside from that, how much can you really know about what's going on with your guys if you're never getting out there with them? And it's one of the things that I really appreciated about the style of leadership that I was able to learn from the Marine Corps If a general wanted to know what was going on in a particular AO, that guy jumped on a helicopter. He went out to that AO and he put his boots on the ground and he went and spoke to junior Marines. Certainly, he would have a conversation with a colonel and with a major, but that general was going to go and talk to your lance corporals and find out their perspective of what was going on in that battle space. And that was often very, very valuable to them. You know, as a chief, if the only people you're communicating with directly are your deputy chiefs and captains, how much do you really know about what's going on out there in the street? You know,
Because you got to think too, every layer there's going to be a little bit more filtering, right? Because
for sure.
it's and we talked about it in a previous episode about General Mattis actually going out to the foxhole, talking with the troop. It's not only going out there and showing your face, but it's also understanding, making sure he knows what his mission is. I'm the one that's giving you, like, I'm the commander. Do you understand what my intent is? Tell it back to me. And we talked about Napoleon's corporal shining his boots at the end of his meeting. If the corporal was able to recite that back to Napoleon, he knew that he was very clear in what his plan was. So making
Yeah.
sure you have it, that actual honest, unfiltered, up and down communication is crucial to your success.
Yeah. So two things there. Number one, you mentioned Madison. There's there's so many stories about that guy, but one that I really love is a general comes on deck. I think this happened at 8th and I, Marine Barracks 8th and I down in Washington, D.C., where the commandant's house is. And if I'm not mistaken, it was actually the commandant who his at AI, and he comes out and he speaks to the Marine that was on post that morning or morning, evening, whatever it was. It was Christmas, and he asked, "Who's the sergeant of the guard?" I think it was. He says, "Sir, it's General Mattis." And he says, "No, no, no. Who's the?" And they go back and, "Sir, it's General Mattis." And Mattis had come out. He wasn't married, no kids, and he wanted for that junior Marine who was standing that post to be able to go be with his family and have the. And he came out and he took the watch, right? Man, what a tremendous way to earn leadership capital and earn the respect of your subordinates. Show them that you have their back. All the things we're talking about in one simple act. You know, not saying it that everybody can do this all the time, but maybe if you're that captain or deputy chief or kids are grown, hey, maybe go work an evening tour on Christmas Eve, or if your family's big on Christmas Eve, or go pick up the day shift on Christmas Day and let a junior guy go home and have an opportunity to get out there and see what's going on at ground level and be with your people. And conversely, because again, this goes both ways. How about inviting one of those younger cops to a CompStat meeting here and there? If you're doing CompStat once a month, every month, invite somebody. Maybe if you do an officer of the month, if they, you have you recognize an officer every month for a job well done, maybe make that part of it. Hey, you're going to come to CompStat. We want to see what you think when you sit in on these meetings. Offer us your perspective. Maybe we're talking about a policy change that's going to affect how you do your job. Maybe you have some input that you can offer on that. Even if they just simply come and sit in on the meeting and you don't let them speak, at least let them get a little inside view of what's going on up in the puzzle. I'll peek behind the curtain, and maybe they can bring that back to their level. I
Yeah.
think it could be a really valuable exercise.
So in my current position, I'm a field tour commander, but I do cover for admin of my district every once in a while when he's out. And I've been involved or invited to attend a number of CompStat style meetings where they're going over. And the more even just observing it, understanding the questions that our chief or deputy chief asks when they're handling certain calls, it's helped me do my job better in the field, because as I'm watching a call unfold in front of me, I'm thinking back to the conversations that I've heard and making sure that I'm checking all the boxes. And it's a lot easier to do that while you're still on scene rather than coming back to get that missing information.
Yeah, later
Um,
after the fact.
yeah, sure. And like, I mean, unfortunately, we get a lot of assaults. Unfortunately, we get a lot of thefts, occasional robberies, violent crime with weapons. And I know how to differentiate a shooting that happened in place X compared to place Y. Place Y is going to bring a lot of media attention and it's going to bring a lot of notoriety. And it's something that I know I need to get information very quickly on. But if it's in this place, I don't want to say it's expected because no one should be expecting a violent crime to happen anywhere, but it's less of a emergent sense of passing of information, right? Same thing with theft, same thing with robberies. And the more that you're able to be involved in that planning process, the more it gives you the why. Why are we paying attention to this when on the surface and comp stat, the statistics the same, but the location is different. And that location or the victims involved, right? Especially as you look in the world of biased crimes, especially now with the amount of attention that's being called to the carpet with the unrest in the Middle East with Palestine and Israel, right? So to not understand that drawing the Star of David on a what would normally be criminal mischief, potentially not biased in nature, it's something that we need to look into. The reason I bring that up is because it's an incident that we just recently had, and that information gathering early in the stages of the investigation to a very simple criminal mischief was very important. But
Yeah.
again, being exactly what you said, these are meetings that are not necessarily part of my job description or job title, but me being
Right.
there has helped me do my job so much better.
Yeah. And it's such simple things that we can do that don't cost anything that can help with all of this. What does it cost you to allow somebody to come sit in on a CompStat meeting? Um, it's if we look for opportunities to implement these things, there's so many.
Yep. And
You just
then
have to care to do it.
then when you get put into that chair, so I actually had to run a recent call for my district. But it wasn't the first time it was the first time I ran it, but I was so well prepared for it because of everything that happened up until that day. So because of that, and I thank the captains that gave me that opportunity, right? Because them seeing me as an up and coming leader empowered me to develop myself to prepare myself for that. So I appreciate that. And that leads us into the next point, the last point for this particular section. Determining how much leaders should be involved and where leaders can best position themselves to command and control the team is key. Leaders are not stuck in any particular position. Leaders must be free to move to where they are most needed, which changes throughout the course of an operation.
So this is a concept that can be applied both very literally and more figuratively as well. Jocko has some really great examples in the book of how he has seen this play out, whether it be being in the stack as a SEAL or guys in the boardroom, right? And I think for many of us, especially in this profession, and especially our veteran community in the profession, we're used to hearing and practicing lead from the front. We hear that all the time, right? Lead from the front. That's not always the best place for you to be as a leader, especially in this profession. Oftentimes, we certainly want to lead by example, but when it comes to leading from the front, you really need to be in a position, especially as a so-called supervisor, where you can detach from the situation and be able to prioritize and execute, be able to see the big picture and appropriately assign your resources, your assets, give direction to your officers. If you are out front in the mix in many situations, you may start getting tunnel vision. You're losing perspective rather than gaining perspective. And so it's important that we literally physically take a step back in many cases. Now, here again, I would add the caveat that, hey, if your officers need you to get in the fray, go hands on. If it's an active shooter situation and you're the most experienced guy there tactically, maybe it is entirely appropriate for you to be breaching a door and leading a team down a hallway. But at a street fight, at a major motor vehicle accident scene, at any one of these incidents that we may respond to where there's a lot going on, you should be the one as the leader that's taking a step back, detaching, and helping to implement that decentralized command, right? Giving people priority tasks and letting them go and execute. You, as the leader, are not the one that should be out there executing those tasks in many of these situations.
Yeah, and if you get too involved in, yeah, I actually just had a large street fight in Jersey City with your guys. We had a shooting right at Pacific Ave at the light rail crossing there. I was on scene with a couple of your guys. A large street fight erupted, and a couple of my junior officers ran right into the middle of the street fight to try to break it up. And when I watched their body camera with them to kind of do a little debriefing after this incident, when they saw how quickly that they were completely engulfed by a very disorderly crowd, and not losing sight at that the fact that we were there for a shooting that came from the house party that all of these people were at. There were well over 100 juveniles, early 20s, uh, individuals that were mixed into this crowd. And my first immediate order to them was detach yourself and get out from the middle of that crowd. But if the only thing that you saw was, hey, there's two people fighting, I need to break up this fight, they inserted themselves into what was a dangerous situation. So having the wherewithal to take that step back and pull people out, and being able to now move in tactfully, now that we had a team of officers in place, and we had a whole squad of people. We had about 20 officers within a couple of minutes due to the response that was required for this incident. So knowing that, hey, yes, we need to stop violence, yes, we need to protect victims, but we're not going to enter a scene that's unsafe unless there's people that are immediately in danger of serious bodily injury or death in those active shooter situations, right? But
Right.
it's, you could have the most technical knowledge, but and you could have be the best at defensive tactics, but you're not going to sacrifice that to lose sight of what you're actually there for when you're a supervisor, because you need to lead the situation, and you can't lead the situation and be the person that's the most hands-on in the situation at the same time. There has to be some sort of a detachment.
And again, it's this can be both real and a little more figurative, right? So maybe instead of a tactical situation, maybe an administrative scenario or something like that, right? If you're a more senior leader, let's say a deputy chief, for example, and you're in charge of a bureau and you have subordinate leaders, captains, lieutenants, and you're getting excuse me, getting down in the weeds and getting involved in things that really should be on captains or lieutenants or even subordinates of theirs, stuff that they should be getting to a sergeant, and you're getting involved with that as a senior leader, you really got to take a step back, and allow that decentralized command to work. What signal does that send if a captain who runs a district, for example, a precinct, is not allowed to make decisions because the leader above him is coming down and making every little decision on his behalf? You're not only are you shutting down the concept of decentralized command, it's sending a signal to that captain that you don't have faith that he can do his job. And even worse, it's sending a signal to those cops beneath him that he is not trusted or respected. And the repercussions of that can be very far reaching. You could see an impact on morale. You could see all sorts of chaos because of miscommunication and who's in charge here and all sorts of things. So, again, determining how much a leader needs to be involved and at what level is really important. And finding that balance is really important, right? We don't want to be aloof, like we were discussing in the previous section. You don't want to be too far removed, but you also can't be too deep in the weeds, you know?
And I'll very openly say that I don't consider myself an expert in pretty much anything, but I'm still learning how to be a leader. I'm still learning my position, and I think that one of the things that's very well talked about is that when you're done learning, you're done with your career. Like the day that you're done learning is the day you should be retired.
Yeah.
So, and I recognize that and I move towards that. I'm fortunate in my department that we're large enough that we're able to move around. Our contract allows us to bid location, shift, days off, our hours, etc. And I've kind of been able to follow people that I've wanted to work for in my career. And from as young as the rank of officer with only a couple of years on, I was empowered to do more than other officers. And I appreciate that. And it helped me develop. It allowed me to make the mistakes. It allowed me to learn from my own mistakes. And I'm here to talk about it, right? So I appreciate the fact that I worked for people that very much followed the decentralized command principles. I think it helped me get to where I am. I'm very purposeful in trying to do that with the people that I now work with. And if there's one concept that I do truly believe in, it's the development of the people that's under you. And the only way to truly do that is to decentralize, remove yourself one step and allow them to make those decisions and forcing them to make those decisions. And I think that's one of the most important roles that we have as a leader in our agency is bringing up and developing those future leaders. And if you don't empower them and you don't give them the ability to do that and make the same mistakes that you potentially made, then they're not going to. It's a disservice to them, it's a disservice to you, and it's a service to our profession as a whole.
Yeah. One last point I'll make on this one is understand as a leader that there may, from time to time, be a disconnect from your intent and the way that your actions are perceived. And one example of that I'll give is when I was newer as a sergeant, as a patrol sergeant, I was always a very proactive cop. I was out there getting after it, and you know, putting on chevrons on my sleeve didn't change that. I still wanted to be out there, and I wanted to be, with the guys and getting in the mix. And more than that, I really embraced that concept of servant leadership. The talked about this before. The word sergeant is derived from the word servant. I saw my role as uh, taking care of my guys. It was my responsibility to take care of them. And so I had a habit of responding to calls with them. And that was out number one, out of a sense of responsibility to them to make sure they were safe and take care of them. So if I thought it was a call that could go sideways, a domestic, for example, or maybe a shots fired, I wanted to be right there in case they needed me. And number two, I wanted to work too. It gets boring when you're a cop, you get to drive around with a partner. When you're a sergeant, all of a sudden you're by yourself. Some guys appreciate that. I was bored, so I was showing up to these calls, and there were a couple of guys out there who didn't understand my intent, and they saw it as, oh, the boss doesn't trust us. He's here checking up on us. He showed up before us, probably because he wants to see how long we're taking to get to the call, or he's looking over our shoulder and all that kind of stuff. So that was something that I had to make some adjustments. I had to communicate for sure and let them know what my intent actually was. And then I had to make sure, back to this point, that I was being conscious of my level of involvement and where I could best position myself. What I found was, it was good enough to wait a block or two away and let them know, hey, I'm here if you need anything. And now it doesn't appear that I'm looking over their shoulder, that kind of stuff. Hey, I trust you. You're good. And if you need me, I'm right down the block,
And I mean, I work in Jersey City too, so I know every motor vehicle stop, there's automatic backup rolling to anybody in our department, right? Majority of calls, even aided unconscious, yes, it could be somebody having a heart attack that you would need two people for CPR, or it could be somebody that is high on PCP that any moment he's going to wake out of his stupor and become the most violent, powerful human being on the planet. But by you being the backup and rolling to those calls, it allows your other officers to do what they need to do also, right? It's not taking them off of a report. It's not taking them off of a different patrol function that they're serving. So I'm all about that, and I do it myself. And yes, it's weird at first when you see a lieutenant backing you up on a motor vehicle stop, but I'm out there all the time. And I
Yeah.
even have guys, hey, I think I'm gonna let this guy go with a warning. I don't care what you do. You have discretion. This is your
Yeah,
motor vehicle.
it's your
Like,
stop. Your
okay,
stop. And
why are you
that
explaining
further
that? Like, go
serves to
for it.
reinforce that decentralized command, right? Like, hey, this is all you.
Yeah,
I'm just here for support. You make whatever decision you
yeah.
think is right, you know.
You
And that
want to
came
give a
up too.
warning, give a warning. You want to issue a ticket. If you don't know the 39 off the top of your head, if you need if you need me to give you the statute, I'll help you out with that. But aside from that, like, do whatever you want to do. That's not why I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm not here to
And I
tell
would
you.
get that a bunch of times when guys were handling a call, you know, maybe it's a domestic, whatever, something where they're not really sure what, you know, and hey, well, tell me what you think. You know, what do you got? What are you inclined to do? What do you think you do? And okay, hear them out. Hey, you know, not a bad idea. My concern with that would be such and such. You know, have you considered this? You know, hey, that would work, except the AG guideline says this. You know, I think maybe you're forgetting that, and you know, here again, just like the stuff we were talking about previously, let them work with their plan, tweak it. Don't just tell them, hey, this is what I would do, or this is what you should do. Let them work through it. Let them get that experience. Take ownership. Let it be their plan that you're just helping them to fine tune. You know, and give them that autonomy, give them that respect, and so on and so forth. So
Yep. Oh, you have any more points you want to bring up today? I think we've
I
hit
think
this
that's
pretty
it. We've
hard.
been going a little over an hour now,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think we're good for this one.
All right,
Next
well,
episode will be picking up with the next section of the book, part 3, sustaining victory. So
yep.
hopefully we can find time in our schedules to push that out soon.
Yep. And if anybody out there has another book suggestion that they want to see us break down, if anyone has any other topics for a podcast that they'd like to hear, if you yourself would like to join us on the podcast to talk about a topic that you're passionate about, civilians included, I battled around with one of our another instructors, Mark Fabricore, about doing a episode on EDPs and dealing with schizophrenic people. I think that's something that we could put together a really nice podcast on. But if you guys have anything, please reach out to us. We're all ears, and we're looking forward to growing this more in the future. Until next
Yeah,
time, stay safe.
This podcast is brought to you by the J. Harris Academy of Police Training. J. Harris Academy of Police Training is based in New Jersey and provides law enforcement training services nationwide for promotional examinations, use of force, supervisory development, and other key areas within law enforcement. This podcast is utilized to discuss key topics occurring within the profession. The opinions and information provided is for entertainment purposes only. In an effort to provide this, we often purposely discuss opposite views and opinions to spark conversation and develop discussion points. The contents of the show and show notes are all copyrighted. All blog posts, podcasts, and show notes that are distributed to the public for free can be redistributed via hard copy or electronic copy for free only if the J. Harris Academy of Police Training is included as the acknowledged author within the actual media that is redistributed. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog. Under no circumstances shall the J. Harris Academy of Police Training, any guests, contributors to the podcast or blog, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the company be responsible for damages arising from the use of the information provided.